Hello and welcome to another episode of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today in studio is our senior editor for all things green, John Snyder.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. It's Friday. I'm feeling pretty good. I think summer is finally taking root here in Michigan. Maybe. We'll see. And on the West Coast, out in Oregon. I don't know if summer's there or not, but joining us from there is James Riswick.
Yes, we beat you to the punch. It's a little ebb and flow there for a while, but it's absolutely gorgeous here. So, no more rain for a very long time.
Well, it's about time. It's basically to be June 1st, which, hey, you should know that is the 15th anniversary of Autoblog.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this weekend, June 1st, light a candle, have some cake, pour one for us. It's our 15th birthday. So we've done a lot since 2004, and, we're excited to be here and obviously excited for what's next. And what's coming up next on the show? We're going to talk about the Honda Passport, the BMW 3 Series, and the Audi RS5. We've all driven those in some form, and excited to tell you more about what we think of them. It's been an interesting week in the news. But before that, we're going to talk about basically Toyota's sports car game. We've got the Toyota 86, which John just drove, and this thing called the Supra, which James has driven. So, you guys seem to care about the Supra. We're always going to look for a reason to talk about this. And yeah, then we'll move on to some of the harder news of the week. There's a new Ferrari hybrid. Renault and FCA earlier this week announced plans for potential merger. Talks and reviews among the boards are ongoing. Rumors say the Jaguar XJ is going away, which I would be very sad about. I really like that car. And finally, the Trailblazer's back for Chevy. We'll close out with that. So let's jump right in. James, Passport. Interesting car, SUV, crossover, whatever you want to call it for Honda. What'd you think of it?
Well, I had the Passport for the Memorial Day weekend, so awesome, road trip, family car. And of course if you have eyes, you can tell that it's totally a Honda Pilot that's been shrunk. And I think it's better for it, actually. Yes, you don't have the 3 rows of seats, but if you don't need 3 rows of seats, it's not a big deal. Now, the thing with the Passport is it's not, there's design and then there's styling. And the design of the Passport is very much the same as the Pilot, but the styling in a fashion sense is totally different. So it has black wheels and blacked out trim. It's a little more macho looking. And I think that does make a difference. It's a little less dumpy and overtly family-oriented, even though it's still very family-friendly for a road trip or just general everyday use. I really like some of the storage solutions, both in the cargo area. There's a nice kind of waterproof area. You can put muddy stuff back in there. We did just that because it was very muddy during our hike this weekend. Had to throw the dogs in the trunk with a bunch of towels in it. Center console up on the front, it's giant. You can fit a person there and you can close it, and then the lid is still usable to put whatever you want on it. It's just a very versatile vehicle. It's a Honda, so it's really nicely well-rounded to drive, ride, handling, just strikes that just right balance. The engine, strong enough, decent fuel economy. The 9-speed automatic, they've improved that. It's probably the best execution that I've had with that, but it's still not a very good transmission. Honda definitely has done better with their new 10-speed. And then really, ultimately, the thing that's disappointing about the Passport is the technology. It is Honda's previous generation infotainment and safety tech. Infotainment, yes, they added a volume knob. That's nice. The rest of the system still isn't that great. Specifically, it's really a pain to go back and forth between the Honda Land, their system, and then the Apple CarPlay and I suppose Android Auto as well. It's just difficult to go back and forth between them. That's just one of the issues there. Then the safety tech, it is problematic, man. It is constantly, I think it has like 3 different lane keeping assists, and you don't know what's on and what's off. And it's the false alarms on it are really aggravating. both in terms of the big brake thing that comes up at you, and you look around going like, where am I braking? What do you think's happening here? The adaptive cruise control system is just not smart, both in terms of the way it brakes and accelerates. Also, it kind of has a couple of winding mountain roads, kind of flummoxed it a bit. It started to accelerate through a right-hand sweeper for me into the car that was still there. So I say this is the previous generation systems because the Accord, the Odyssey, and I'm pretty sure, and definitely the CR-V have the new systems. They are substantially better. Meanwhile, the Passport and the Pilot and our long-term Ridgeline, all had that. All have the same thing as the Passport. Civic does as well. Now, all of these systems are standard, which is good. However, it's good that they're standard because I wouldn't want to pay extra for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's sort of driven me nuts about certain Hondas I've driven, especially the adaptive cruise control and just how frustrating it is to use. It really seems like you have to sort of pay attention to it more than you would if you were just paying attention to the road, which is not ideal.
Mm-hmm. And then compare that to the Kia Niro EV we have right now. That thing's fantastic. That I put that adaptive cruise control system on, and it like the Honda has lane keeping assist, but that is almost like a high-end Mercedes or a BMW system where that thing was pretty much driving for me in terms of steering and keeping, like, it wasn't drunkenly going between lanes or the lane markings. So kind of the same price point there, but Kia system far superior. And this was also the range-topping Passport. It's also the newest Honda. Obviously there's elements of platforms and electronic systems, yada yada, but like really it's the newest Honda. Shouldn't it have the newest Honda systems?
Yeah, it seems like they kind of stubbed their toe on that one. Like I don't quite get why they chose to execute it that way. I mean, my take on the Passport is that it goes into a market segment that people really want that right now. So even though they're really starting to slice up that crossover segment really thinly, I mean, hey, whatever, give the people what they want. I think it looks pretty cool, cooler than the Pilot and maybe the CR-V. I don't know. I like how the CR-V looks too. But, James, your point there on those, the black wheels, it's a sweet looking crossover. But it sounds like it's got a lot of just areas that when you really live with it, it kind of lets you down a little bit. Yeah.
And honestly, I think I could live with it because, I literally lived with the annoying tech stuff. Because really, it is such a better package size than all of those other mid-size SUVs. So you get way more space than a Murano, an Edge, and especially a Blazer, and it's cheaper. The as test, this thing was loaded about $45,000, but the same equipment on a Murano would be about $1,500 more, and then a Blazer's $2,000 more. A Ford Edge is even more than that. So it's actually a good value, and so it really does make a lot of sense, as you say, and it really is. If you look at the numbers, right smack in the middle of CR-V and Pilot in terms of size. The hardest thing is remembering to say Passport when you mean Pilot and Pilot when you mean Passport. It kind of scrambles your brain.
Passport's a good name. Last used on a rebadged Isuzu, I believe.
Heck yeah.
But I think it's a little confusing, like to your point, James. But hey, a name that's not confusing, the iconic 3 Series. We had one in the fleet here in Detroit. I was excited to drive it just because of, hey, who's not excited to at least think about, getting behind the wheel of a 3 Series. I would say they've done a good job holding serve with this new generation. Check out Jeremy Korzeniewski's review from December when he went to the first drive. But now we're actually getting a chance to drive it around in like real world conditions. I was trying to get John to talk about this the other morning over coffee in the office, and he was just kind of like, yeah, I mean, we could talk about it on the podcast, but it didn't really do much for me. So I think, like, to me, that's the story here is like, you just drove a 3 Series and you're kind of like, okay.
Yeah, I think compared to the competition, it just sort of lacks personality. It does everything well. I mean, it drives well. It's comfortable. I really like the technology. But yeah, it just doesn't feel special like the 3 Series used to feel to me. I'd much rather have an Audi A4, which I think is more involving, and I like the design better. I like BMW sometimes gets a little overwrought with its design. I mean, even if you look at the key fob, it's like this weird geometry and stuff. I don't know. It just doesn't. Yeah, like you said, it just doesn't do it for me. I was left. I was kind of bored. I mean, it's willing to play, but it's not like knocking on the door saying, "Hey, come out and play," like some of these other cars are.
It's I enjoyed it. I like BMWs. It's kind of a thing with me where like I would kind of agree with your assessment. The A4 and the C-Class, I think in most ways are probably better. We'd have to stack them up and really grade them out like we do in our comparison tests. But I have a feeling this would probably come in second at best. Mm-hmm. This is a newer version of it. It's, it looks fresher. The design, I think, it's still very much like, straight out of BMW central casting. In some ways, I think they went a little too far afield. Like when I look at the side, it reminds me a little bit of the C-Class, which I frankly never think that's what you want to do if you're BMW. The front end's got almost like a bit of like, I would say a Decepticon kind of look. I don't know. I feel like BMW has gone away from being simple, clean, and their design's gotten a little too busy, a little too aggressive. I think they should chill out. Let Cadillac and Lexus do that because that's kind of who they are. And I always like that simple, clean German austerity in the 3 Series and it's like, siblings. I enjoyed driving it probably more than you did, John. I think, the turbo engine was pretty good. I think the steering's decent.
Yeah, the steering's really good.
It's very solid.
But yeah, I mean that. I don't know. Yeah, these are all good things. It doesn't do anything badly, but it just doesn't. It just doesn't excite.
I think with the 3. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting because I just had the BMW M2 this past weekend, and I kind of echo your thoughts. Like I was so excited to get this, and then I just found myself going, I feel I should love this, but I just don't, and. I think part of it is design. I think you're absolutely right. It's the overwrought. It's this. There's just because underneath the M2 is a 2 Series, and it's just a little too rounded. It's overwrought, soft. I think is the right. Mm-hmm. It's not mechanical looking enough. And it really carries on to the 3 Series as well. And the other thing about the 3 Series is I have not driven it, but I've also noticed that. There's just not been a lot of hype about it, both amongst us in the industry as well as just enthusiasts everywhere. It's a 3 Series. This is the winner of every comparison test ever, and yet it's kind of been. Maybe it's because everybody loves crossovers, but like we don't. Like we like cars still, and it's just kind of like the Genesis. A Genesis had a much bigger, like it landed with a big punch to the face. And the 3 Series comes out and go, how's the steering? Is it better? I think that's really interesting. And I'm sure it is better, because it seems to me you're saying it's better than the last one, which was generally disappointing. But I don't know if it's making the waves that they wanted it to, or you would expect.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's tough competing with a Ghost. There's a Counting Crows song. I'll dip into my lyrics here. Like dreams are like movies and memories are films about ghosts. And the 3 Series has got to compete against some, pretty legendary ghosts. Let's put it that way. And I think a lot of times people don't just get in that car and judge it on its current merits. It's like, well, this is how I remember reading about how this other car was when I was a kid. So you're really looking at things through like, with a lot of Instagram filters on. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's true.
But, the car itself, though, I think we are all in agreement. It is a little not quite what we think. I mean, if I look at the interior, the Mercedes has a better interior. I mean, it's it's not even close. Mercedes interiors are killing it. And you get inside a BMW and you're like, okay, there's kind of a lot going on here. The materials are okay. The angles are kind of weird. Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. It's not bad, but it's not maybe what I would expect. It's not top of class. Infotainment, nah. Okay. It's not as bad as like the Lexus system, but it's, not great either. I think we've all kind of kicked the car for its design. It's just pretty good, I think.
Yeah.
Very good. So I guess we leave it there. The 3 Series is pretty good. We hoped it would be awesome, and it's just kind of pretty good. Speaking of German cars, Audi RS5, you've been commuting in one, John, as you're wont to do as an Autoblog editor.
Yeah.
How'd you feel?
Wow. So this car, it really left an impression on me. In a couple ways, it was really fun, really fast. This thing just rips. It's I was talking to Reese about it. I've ridden horses before where you just can't get them to trot or to walk. They just want to gallop no matter what you tell them to do. And that's what this car was to me. It was just wanted to be at top speed all the time. I mean, not top speed, because top speed in this one was 170 some miles per hour. But
you didn't hit that on M14 or US 23 on your way out to Ann Arbor?
No, not even close. But this thing really, really wanted to creep that way all the time. And it was hard to get it to settle down, especially with this suspension. It knocks you pretty good. And if you like a very involved car that transmits everything that's going on between tire and pavement, this does that very, very well. But even in comfort mode, it's still it'll rattle your feelings quite a bit. Michigan roads maybe aren't the best example of prime territory for this. But man, it was fun. It has just oodles of grip. Going through a corner, it tempts you to give it more and more gas, and it just digs in. The shifts are super quick and crisp. I loved it. I wouldn't want to daily drive it at all, but I would totally own one as a second car and take it to the track. It just wants to go fast.
The RS line, I think, is pretty sweet right now. I think Audi's really got that dialed in. They're doing, I think, all the right things with the chassis, with the way they're tuning the engines, with the exterior design. I think they really have that right. I've been to their sort of like Quattro Center in Germany, and that's kind of where they work on like the RS line. And I really think they're doing some good things with that. The RS7 is really more my flavor of brandy. I just think I kind of like that sort of performance in a bigger car. It's weird. it is what it is.
Yeah.
Would love to get in the RS5, although I actually didn't because I was like, hey, I need to get in the 3 Series. Man, I guess it sounds like from what you're saying, I should have done the RS5.
Yeah, it was definitely the more exciting of the two. Maybe not the best if you were, taking the kid to daycare or something, but
the 3 Series wasn't great for a car seat either, but it worked. I was sitting pretty far forward, but hey, these are the compromises you make for safety. So that's what we drove this week. It's actually, I think, a pretty wide-ranging group of vehicles here. Mm-hmm. And you two had some time in some Toyota sports cars. James, you drove this thing that I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It's called the Supra. I don't know. It gets like no traffic. Nobody seems to care. I don't know, except I'm totally kidding. Everybody loves the Supra. It gave us probably half of our site traffic this year. And John, you drove the 86, which is another interesting car. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I've been in the BRZ actually more recently, but, same deal basically. So my question to both of you guys is, Toyota now has two pretty good sports cars in their lineup. They're pretty specialized, different price points, sort of different ethos, totally different styling. Interestingly, both developed as part of like joint ventures with rival companies. How do we feel about Toyota's outlook for sports cars?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is the partnerships with these. I think it's a good way for Toyota to sort of relaunch its sports car brand. Hopefully, they can take more ownership of it in the future. But man, I love driving the 86 every chance I get. Same goes for the BRZ. It's just a really fun car to just ring out, and it sort of wraps around you, and it's very involving. And you can just go nuts on it, and it's not that fast, so you're never pushing some crazy limits or anything. So I love it. I'd like to see Toyota take more ownership of their sports cars and do something a little different. But I think this is a good start.
James, you were in the Supra. Obviously, that is, I guess, the flagship, if you will, of the Toyota sports car stable, at least on the Toyota brand side of things. I mean, you think they're good where they are? Or you think we need to, I don't think they need a third car. That would probably be excessive, although, hey, we're not going to say no to that.
Right.
I don't know. State of the Union. What do you think?
Well, they also had an 86 on hand at the Supra launch. So I have also recently driven it. And the thing is, partnership is the only way it's going to happen, because they don't sell them enough. They don't sell enough to really warrant the effort. So I think it's smart. The thing is, they were very different partnerships. So the Subaru one was very much develop the car together. We're gonna create this car and badge engineering it. So sure, Subaru turns a little dial in the suspension or whatever, but basically they're the same car. And when Toyota went in to do the BMW, with BMW, they thought, oh, we're just going to do the same thing. And then quickly with BMW, they decided, no, we don't have to do that. We can just kind of develop a basic platform here using bits and pieces from various BMWs, and then go our separate ways and create our own thing. Totally different partnership. Now, are they still using BMW bits and pieces? Well, yes, obviously. But the Supra does not...
Obviously and controversially, right?
Yes. But they did create their own car using this. It's like having a Lego set, and they all got the same, bag of Lego pieces, but BMW went and made something with it, and Toyota made something else with it. That's kind of the best analogy there for the Supra and the Z4. And I think it's smart, because if you don't do that, you don't have any sports cars at all. So would you like Toyota with a lot of BMW parts, or would you like nothing? So if you want nothing, then I'm sorry.
I think that's a good point. I think you and I are in agreement on this, James. We were talking about this, I want to say sometime around the Detroit Auto Show when the Supra was, revealed. And my take was, why is it a bad thing to have your, sports car, really important sports car, have a lot of expertise from people who know how to make really good sports cars?
Right.
I don't think it's a bad thing to have some BMW DNA coursing through your veins or in your tissues. I think that's fine. And likewise for the Z4. That's okay. Toyota's a great engineering company. They know what they're doing. They know how to make high quality, reliable cars. To me, both these partnerships are actually nothing but beneficial for all of the people involved. In the 86, actually, that was with Subaru. That's where you get the BRZ sort of variant of this. And I do think it's interesting how that one was almost like there was no controversy. Nobody was like, this is blasphemy. You're, teaming up with Subaru, which is going to have this BRZ, and then Toyota, which at the time actually had it as a Scion FRS in the United States, though the 86 was sold in other markets. Almost nobody was really fired up about that. We all just liked these like pure manual transmission, lightweight cars, that, were just kind of another thing, to cross shop against like a Miata or something. Nobody was really that fired up about it as far as, negative connotations. With this, it's been like, I believe we did a couple of posts just on like the Firestorm. People are really outraged, including some of our editors. So, I get it. And I will candidly admit that I've come to this sort of controversy a little more chill. Like, I like the Supra. I respect what it is. I've always liked the Z4, in fact. But to me, this isn't like, that much of a hot button issue. For other people, it really is. So
I would offer two other things. The first is that Toyota actually did a lot for the Z4. And the way the Toyota chief engineer describes it, he went on there and he wanted to make a sports car. And the way he defines that is something that is very compact, like very specific compact dimensions that are pretty much exactly what the Boxster and Cayman are. And that's why the Z4 is smaller. That's why it's a big reason why it is a more dedicated, not hardcore, but more dedicated sports car now, and more of a Boxster Cayman competitor. It was because of that input from Toyota wanting to. That's what they wanted to do, and it's one of the reasons the Z4 went in that direction as well. And the other thing about the Supra is, if you look at the beloved Supra from the 90s. Toyota threw the kitchen sink at that. That was their pinnacle of engineering excellence, and that's what everybody wants from the Supra. However, in today's dollars, it costs around $90,000, and its sales, probably not inconsequentially of that, was about a tenth of what its predecessor was. So, Toyota could do that again, but then you have a Nissan GTR that no one buys. And at the same time, I'd argue that they do make that car. It's called the Lexus LC. That's everything that Toyota can do at the moment. That car is amazing. And if it's going to be $100,000, it should be a Lexus, not a Toyota. And that's what they've done. And I think that's very smart. And so their pinnacle of engineering is the Lexus LC. And if you want something cheaper, at frankly a reasonable price, if you look at what, how much the Z4 costs, how much that M2 costs, it's perfectly reasonable, and it comes at the result of teaming up, which is what we just covered.
So I think Toyota's in pretty good shape here. Little bit controversial on, a couple of fronts, but overall, I think when I think back to the dark days of, as we were on the eve of the recession and we were thinking like, hey, they're never going to do another Supra. And there was, the LFA was sort of the only almost unobtainable supercar you could get from Lexus. And they weren't producing supercars or sports cars that anybody but a limited few could buy. And now this is where we stand. So I think they're in a good place. I think we're in a good place. And I think we should talk some news. Hybrid time. Hybrid Ferrari time. The SF90 Stradale. That sounds kind of like a code word for some sort of secret pasta recipe. Mr. Greed Editor, how do you feel about this?
Oh, man, I'm so excited about this. I've been wanting something like this from Ferrari for a really long time. We knew they were doing a hybrid. We knew it would have around 1,000 horsepower, and then this is it. It's a plug-in hybrid with a turbo V8. 986 horsepower, and it looks awesome. I just keep coming back to the photos of this and zooming in on little details. It's a true Ferrari, at least from that standpoint. I'm sure it'll drive great too. But yeah, super excited about this one.
So the play here is obviously performance enhancing along the Formula One sort of strategies, which I think is brilliant. EV range is a little under 16 miles, 15.5 if we've converted this precisely. So that's not nothing. I mean, that's enough for some people to get to work if that's what you're using your Stradale for.
Yeah, I'm glad that they have, that it can actually go in electric only power.
My wife could drive to work and back and still have electric range. I should suggest that to her. It's a perfectly reasonable thing. More range than a Mini Countryman E, in fact.
Absolutely. It's, we'll have to add this to our list of buying guides for consumer. I think the Stradale is something you might want to cross shop.
Mm-hmm.
But the point here is the electrification gives it, a leg up on performance. Instant torque, 590 pound-feet of torque. 3 electric motors allows it to, direct that power to various wheels, and that's gonna improve handling. It's gonna improve acceleration. It's all-wheel drive. It's gonna have a lot of grip. It's
I think
0 to 62 in 2.5 seconds.
That's crazy. I mean, the performance here is going to be it's going to be unreal. It's going to be amazing.
I also will say, I think this is the first good-looking Ferrari. Not best-looking since, but the actual best, like the only good-looking Ferrari since the F355 in the 90s. I think everything else has not been very good-looking. Even the Italia. I think the Italia was the best since then, but I don't think it was really that pretty. So I don't think Ferraris have been that good. The California, hideous. The Scaglietti, hideous. Just not very pretty cars. I think they're Ferraris and people get all hot and bothered about them, but I don't think they've been very pretty. And I think this one is. This one looks sensational.
Hot take from James Riswick.
I don't think
I liked the 458.
no!
I like the Scaglietti too. James is like furrowing his brow. He's like, the Scaglietti was hot garbage.
Now I'm looking. Oh no, that was terrible. Oh no, the googly eyes and the. Oh no, that wasn't that. No.
Oh, that was a good looking car. You don't know what you're talking about.
Looked like a fish.
It was definitely, I think, a timeless design that was underappreciated. That's going to hold up better. This one I'm a little mixed on. I think it's cool looking, and it's very 2019, which is almost like what we were talking about the 3 Series. It's aggressive. It's got all this stuff going on, but it's not a classic, smooth, clean Pininfarina design because it's not a Pininfarina design. Ferrari designs basically all of their cars in-house these days in their, central styling center. So, I mean, I think, this is sort of a subplot. Ferrari and Pininfarina don't do much these days together. And I think a lot of that is because Ferrari's like, hey, we want to do this our own way. And, you're seeing the results of that.
I kind of like the fact that LED lighting, just in terms of the styling on this thing, LED lighting is allowing car companies to minimize headlights again. Mm-hmm. So back like when we think of like the real, the Lamborghini, like the late 70s, the 80s, like pop-up headlights. Pop-up headlights were cool because you didn't have to show them on the car. And it created this really streamlined look on everything. And I'm a big fan of that look. And LED lighting is kind of allowing us to go back to that. And I think that's one reason why this really resonates with me in kind of the same way than F355 did. Is because of that minimalist like lighting. You don't have to have those big, like think of the Modena Ferrari. Like it had this big giant headlight cluster on it, almost like kind of like a Corvette. And I think that kind of mitigated its coolness. But this thing's right back to it. It is. It's very cool.
So very cool. Hard fade here. Renault Fiat Chrysler merger. I guess
that's also so cool. So cool.
I was just saying the best way to digest in-depth, macroeconomic business mergers and acquisitions. Just cool or not cool? What do you guys think? I think cool, and we'll leave it there. What do you think? Cool, John?
No, not cool.
Not cool, James.
Well, I have a 9-part treatise about this. Specifically, let's talk about the Japanese executive structure. Now, point 1 about that, fine. It's gonna.
Sure,
it's kind
maybe.
of like a variety of sick men of various places. Like Renault. I've driven a Renault in the last year. Yeah, I don't know how much that's going to contribute to the interior quality of Fiat Chrysler products. And then I don't know. I think there's some cool. Just leave it there.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's so much unknown right now that I'm a little surprised just how fired up people are getting. I mean, I guess, of course, people are going to get fired up with, multinational companies. Fiat, of course, is the industrial symbol of Italy in many ways. So they certainly aren't going to take this lightly. But we don't really know how and if this will impact products. I think right now, Fiat Chrysler, Chrysler is in a pretty good place with the Ram and the Jeep brands.
Yeah.
Chrysler, Dodge, not so much, but Dodge is actually fine. I mean, Dodge is the muscle car brand. That's who they are. That's all they need to be. I don't see what the French could possibly do to help out Dodge. Maybe Chrysler, although they've already kind of tried, making Lancias Chryslers, and that didn't do much. I don't think that ever even got off the ground. So it's, again, kind of a weird alliance. I think it could potentially benefit FCA because remember, they're the aggressors here. They are looking in and seeing, Nissan and Renault aren't getting along. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could dive in. And suddenly they have a 50-50 stake in Renault. Well, boom, that's a power play. Do they want 50% of Renault? I don't know. That could also be a headache.
Well, you also have products there in the Renault portfolio. They do sell 3 SUVs. So there's potential platform sharing. And again, I've driven one of those SUVs. It's actually pretty fun to drive. So much as Chrysler has their lineup is a collection of parts from different corporate tie-ins, from Mercedes-based Challengers and Grand Cherokees to Fiat-based Jeeps to the Daimler Chrysler Dodge Caliber underpinnings of a Dodge Journey. They're all over. So why not just throw in a Renault Koleos into the next generation Chrysler compact SUV? Like, let's just make this a real global part sharing effort.
It's really, when you think about this here, this is like what Marchionni, the late Sergio Marchionni, was always talking about. I need alliances. Like, alliances must be a thing. Then boom, Mike Manley, who's the new CEO, basically his first order of business is, hey, let's take over Renault. I mean, it's not a takeover, but I mean, look at who's making the moves here and tell me who's really could be called the shots, at least initially. Ultimately, Renault is probably in stronger overall shape, maybe, but at least their leadership, I think, has maybe a firmer foundation as far as just with the French state owning what is the third of the company or something. It seems like ultimately they could be the ones who take over the merger, but right now Manley is he's the horse, he's leading the charge, and I think it's a gutsy move. It may not be necessarily the right move, but he's not waiting around to see what happens. He's let's go for it. And I respect that.
My question is, where does this leave Nissan? They will end up with a more diluted stake in the larger company. They're not in good shape right now with their leadership. Their leadership and the French leadership have had, their troubles. I don't know how adding more European countries into it is going to improve that. I don't know where this leaves Nissan in, after in the aftermath of this. Are they going to be looking for their own lifeline from another company to get out of this, or it just sort of leaves them sort of pummeled and in the dust, basically. A
lot of uncertainty for Nissan, but this could be exactly what they want, because they weren't in love with being part of the alliance under its sort of current structure. So this could be their lifeline to independence. Maybe the Japanese government invests them a little bit. just as a short-term thing to like stabilize their, corporate structure. I don't think Toyota and Honda would love that, but I mean, this could be their lifeboat to get away from this alliance, which they were not loving life under Carlos Ghosn. So this could be that. Worst case scenario is they become like number 3 or 4 in this alliance. And I think ultimately that would be an untenable position anyway. Ultimately, they would try to break away.
Yeah, I think you're right.
The other thing here is, even with Nissan, let's say Nissan did stay in, one element of this is that if FCA comes in, because Renault, a giant portion of their ownership is from the French government. So if the French government no longer has the sizable share and therefore influence over their partner, that has long been a very sore point for Nissan, that the French government had a lot of control. And the other thing is, apparently this new merger would be based in the Netherlands as opposed to being in France. And that would allow Nissan to be able to exercise some voting rights that it currently doesn't have in the merger. So this might, like in terms of corporate business, actually be a good thing for them potentially. And the other thing with this merger is not a lot of these brands there's not a lot of overlap. The main one is Nissan and FCA in the United States. However, like Nissan Titan Ram, really? No, they have drop in the bucket compared to Ram sales. And then their cars are very different. So I don't think there's a lot of toes to be stepped on. So I think it could actually work, especially since it is an alliance. It's not like the differences between Renault and Nissan are indeed greater than I'm pretty sure than even Fiat and Chrysler right now. So that's something else to think about.
So now that we've talked about, let's see, the French, the Italians, the Japanese, one thought on that. I think it's really interesting that all of these car companies have such heavily invested, whether materially or just in terms of national interest, their governments, Fiat Chrysler, even until a couple of years ago, had like the American taxpayers and the Canadian taxpayers owned a good chunk of them. They're actually the least government-controlled entity of any of these car companies right now, which, I mean, to me, you add all these political scenarios into it, who knows? But since we've talked about all of these governments, we should probably talk about the British, right?
Probably.
Makes sense. But not the government Jaguar. We are hearing some rumblings that the XJ is going away. This is one of my favorite Jaguars. I've always had a soft spot for this thing. I think its time may have passed, though. Just the era of big sedans. I don't know. I mean, sad, not sad? What do you guys think?
It depends on what follows it up. If they do, in fact, replace it with something of a similar size, and especially if that thing has electric motors, I'll be pleased for sure. And we know that Jaguar is working on something like that. So yeah, I'm not super sad. I mean, it's a nameplate.
It's a pretty good nameplate, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see how, like, Mr. Green Car Editor, you would be more than willing to pull the plug out of the XJ if you could plug in its replacement.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, for sure. I will honestly be a little bit sad to see it go away if it in fact does, but I don't think there's going to be a vacuum there for Jaguar. They're going to do something to fill that space.
You got to have an S-Class fighter or a 7 Series fighter if you're Jaguar. I think you do, even if it becomes even more of a niche product. Although if they could electrify it in some form, and I mean, like really electrify it, like make it a Tesla fighter, boom, that's probably better. That is better than the XJ. So, James, any hard thoughts on this?
Yeah, it should be a Tesla. It should be a Tesla fighter. Like, period. Forget the S-Class. The last XJ couldn't be an S-Class because of it was more driver-focused car, didn't have as much space in it. I love the design of that car, though. That was a car that I would put posters up in my wall about. But as an electric car, it's viable. And furthermore, Jag has the I-Pace. They have the ability. This is not just something that we're kind of hypothesizing here. They have the technology. They can build it. And also, if you have a bigger, longer car, that's more batteries, and it's just like Tesla, it makes it even more viable. So I don't think it's the end of XJ. I mean, unless they just feel that there is utterly no brand awareness for XJ in the modern world, I think it would be back. The car we have now, sure, that's going away. It should. It's really old at this point. But I think that would be the right thing. Because the other thing is you don't want to abandon cars and sedans entirely, because the market could always change. And people are still, I mean, Tesla Model S and the Model 3 still popular, still cars. So if you have something that's cool, if a car looks cool, then people will buy it. And I mean, the Porsche Taycan, that's a car. So I think that would be the only way that it could be successful, and I think it probably would be as successful as a Jaguar can be, which probably isn't that successful.
So there you go. And on its way back in is the Chevy Trailblazer. Will that be successful? I think it's I think it probably will be like Chevy successful. Like it'll, you know, it's not going to be the top of the segment, but it'll be decent. It'll be fine. I don't know.
You'll see a ton of them in Michigan, and I will never see a single one.
That's true. You'll be like, wait, guys, the Trailblazer's back? I didn't know that.
It has an Arizona plate on it and a UPC code on the side. Oh, it's a rental car. Oh, okay, that's
yeah.
fine.
I was just gonna say you're gonna see a lot of these in rental fleets for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think this is. I said this with the Blazer. They're taking like their best name, like that they have sort of on hand that like is relatively recent, and they're slapping it on their next like vehicle that's coming along. I don't know if this is the right thing to really call this. Like, to be a Trailblazer sounds like a Wrangler fighter. And boom, this is like something that slots between the Equinox and the Trax. I mean, I don't know. I do think it looks pretty solid. My guess is John will disagree because he hates the Blazer. So he's going to think this thing does not look good. But I think it looks pretty good. I actually think, who knows, this could be a sleeper car. Sometimes people like will just look at it and say, oh, hey, that looks pretty good. It's a crossover. Next thing you know, it's like a sneaky fourth or fifth of the segment. But I think that's probably about where this thing's going to max out.
I kind of like the proportions on this thing a little bit better than the actual Blazer. So there's that. It's got that going for it for me anyway.
Other than as a press car, James will never see it, but do you have a strong opinion?
Well, the Trailblazer, see, the thing is, so you're right, the Trailblazer name does sound like it should be on a Wrangler fighter. However, it has never been applied to anything like that. It was originally the fancy GMC Envoy version of the Blazer, so that mid-90s one that hung around forever. And then it was on a not good at all body-on-frame mid-size SUV that never went off-road at all unless it crashed. So it's not like there's no brand cachet to Trailblazer. So to me, it seems logical that, okay, you have this thing, the Blazer. It looks like this, and it's called the Blazer, and now we have this new thing that looks like the Blazer, and we have this name that's kind of like a Blazer, so why don't we call it that? I think it's perfectly logical. It makes sense in the marketplace. Should they make something that's a Wrangler fighter? Yes, they should. But they should actually make one of those, because they don't have one. Yes, there's a Holden we were talking about this yesterday, how there's a Holden Trailblazer in their Australian outfit, but that is not the answer. That is a Pontiac G8 all over again, or a Chevrolet SS, or a Pontiac GTO, and we all know how that ended up. So I don't think GM's going to go down that road again, nor should they.
All right, guys. I think we'll leave it there. The Trailblazer is going down a different road. We'll see. And That's it for this week's episode of the Autoblog Podcast. It was fun hanging out with you guys this week on a Friday morning.
Yeah.
If any of you are at the Detroit Grand Prix, that's this weekend on Belle Isle. Beautiful Belle Isle, floating in the Detroit River right between the U.S. and Canada. And it's a really cool venue. So if you see any of the Autoblog team there, be sure to say hi. We won't be at any other major racing circuits this weekend that I know of, but we will be around at the IndyCar circuit. So with that, reach out to us on all of our social platforms. Send us your Spend My Monies because we would love to do that. Be safe out there. We'll see you next week.